Sansedai is about my grandmother and her journey growing up during the war in Japan and migrating to the US shortly after the war in the 1950s. And they came over on a freight ship. It has like a few rooms on a freight ship, and they came over in that with a bunch of stuff because it was a freight ship, so they could actually bring a lot of stuff. When I turned 20, the coming of age year in Japan, my mom asked me to put on her old kimono. I questioned my own Japanese identity. Was I even Japanese enough to wear this kimono? But when I put the kimono on for the first time, I immediately felt a genuine connection to the women in my life. I thought about how my mom felt when she wore this kimono at her wedding, merging her Japanese family with a white American family. I thought about my grandmother, who wore the same kimono on her wedding day, just a month before embarking on a journey to America. And then they're in LA, they met some like Nisei, so people who are Japanese but had a few generations in California. They made friends with them in on the boat, and they hosted them in California for a bit. And they're like, "Oh, this is kind of nice. Like, I like it here." And they're like, "Oh, but you can't rent there, or you can't own there, because of all the restrictions from all the laws that were put in effect." I grew up in like suburbs, very white. It was like white and Hispanic community, mostly white, and in Colorado, and like didn't really see many people who look like me. Japanese people, like if you go to like Denver or Aurora, like there's more Asians, but not as many. Like there's not like community of like Japanese people. And then I went to school in Maine, which is also
Yeah.
doesn't have that diversity either. And then even in New York, I didn't really tap into like Japanese community. And there's a lot of like, it's a really strong Chinese community. There's really strong Filipino community. There's a lot of representation, and especially if you go to places like Queens. But it wasn't until like I moved to LA that I was like, oh, like these are my people. Like there's restaurants, there's grocery stores, there's like, you can really find these things. So I was like really trying to tap more into my culture, and like I feel like there's like a lot of us who were mixed or like grew up in very whitewashed communities, like were forced to like assimilate and let go of our culture. And like also like my mom, like she had to assimilate too. And so like what I'm sure there's like a limited amount that she wanted, like of her culture that she wanted to pass on, or like that she could. Like my dad couldn't speak Japanese, so like if she's speaking it in the home, like he's left out of the conversation. So I'm sure, you know, for survival too, like there was limited amount that she wanted to, or she could keep going. And so I feel like I'm that next generation who's like yearning to like connect. And also on top of that, I found a bunch of like archival footage that my family had, because my grandparents.
Yeah, that's actual archival footage of your grandma as a little girl.
I'm so glad that they had that. It was like they had it. It was obviously film scans, and then they converted to VHS, and then from there it was like, oh, we have DVDs. I was like, oh my god, that's even like outdated now. I was like, okay, like grandma, like DVDs are like already outdated. She's like, what? And so I converted that to digital. Even at the last minute of like editing, I needed to have like a cut for my composers like by the next day, and I found another DVD of like footage from my grandfather's side. When I sat down with Morel for talking about like, what do we want this to sound like? She's like, I need like emotions. Like, what are like we had specific like timestamps of this is from this to this, but like this is like hope, this is excitement, this is you know, this is foreboding, or this is whatever it is. And she really nailed that. But my temp track was a waltz, and I was like, I need this to be like a waltz at this tempo.
You asked her, like, with all of these things coming your way, you know what I mean? How do you do it? And she says, just keep living. Like, what else was I supposed to do? Is she really right? She says, I don't know if it's because I came up in the war or what. It's like, but all I know to do is you keep living.
You have to live. I think it's war made it that way. Like, I don't like the war, but how do you do? What do you do? You have a life, and then you have to live. What do you do? Just keep living, that's all.